It is John Gibbons. It is Midweek Extra. We're back in the studio after being on location last week in a Green King pub, but we are back in the Anfield Wrap studio, and we're back talking about the squad, and we are in association with Green King Sports for Midweek Extra all season. Make sure you're downloading the Green King Sports app if you want to get out and watch some live sport this weekend, and anytime that live sport is on the telly or up to an hour before, you are getting 10% off any drinks that are applicable with your Green King Sports app. So make sure you download the app. It'll tell you where your nearest Green King Sports pub is. And there's absolutely loads of sports on the telly. Can't wait for the 5:30. Definitely sort of getting out for that on Saturday. It is a massive game. Not to step on the Friday show toes sort of too much. But yeah, it is a massive one. So yeah, I think sport to be enjoyed together and to enjoy in a pub. So maybe get down to Green King Sports pub this weekend to do just that. But for the show, I want to do something similar to the squad video show I do with Neil, but without the fancy graphics and just with some red hot chat. And the chat doesn't get any more red hot than when I'm with Dan Austin, with Ali Gunn, and with Mo Stewart. And so we're going to go through from defence to attack in 3 parts and answering some particular questions, some relevant to the position and some the same for each one. But we'll start with the defence, and I'll do a little bit on the summer picture for all of them. So no additions at all in the defence over the summer. We sold Van der Berg, got a decent amount of money for him, and Joel Matip left, and a few lads went out on loan. So the question I'm going to start with you, Mo, and I'm going to start with all the positions is, did you think we were strong enough going into the season in defence?
Maybe. Honestly, it's really hard because I'm always aware of the fact that the squad that you want in the summer is never really going to bear a full correlation to the squad as the season goes through, because there's so many variables you don't know, mainly being injuries, because that's the thing that's kind of held us back so many times. So you always want an extra one in to kind of say, well, in case that happens. But I think you can look at it and say, well, Sepp Vandenberg wasn't really part of the squad the season before, so selling him didn't really make us weaker. You could make the argument that, yes, we lost Joel Matip, but we gained Jarell Quansah, and that kind of happened the season before as well. So, I mean, I think most people would have still preferred an extra centre-half just to have a little bit more ballast. But then you look at how we've kind of played so far this season, I think the biggest thing is the fact that we've got more minutes out of Konate than anyone expected. And so that means that you haven't really needed a 5th centre-half. Then you look at left-back, and I was of the opinion that you could quite easily make, like, if either one of those two got a good offer, I'd be interested in maybe upgrading because they are both getting on. But as it's turned out so far, we're getting good performances out of Tsimikas and hopefully good performances out of Robertson to continue. So you feel like, as much as that's still a position where you think that they would buy someone in the near future, I don't think it's a case of we absolutely desperately need to do one before the end of the season.
How about you, Ali? Did you think we were strong enough in defence going into the season, and have you changed your mind?
I was a big advocate of buying a left-footed centre-back this summer, and I thought just because of Konate's injury history, Joe Gomez, obviously there was talk of him potentially getting a move over the summer. I thought maybe this is the time that we do something slightly different and we go for a left-footed centre-back. Now, I wouldn't say I've been made to eat my own words, but performances suggest that we actually don't look any less because we haven't bought one. I would say that I err on the side of caution with Konate. I think he has been absolutely magnificent this season. He's been world class, but that injury record still it sort of nags away in the back of my mind slightly. And I think over the next sort of 6 weeks, we're playing a game every 4 days. So I think his rotation is absolutely vital to how well we perform. Similar to Robertson and Tsimikas as well. I think my expectations are we don't sign another one between now and the end of the season. I agree with Mo. I think actually performances have been good enough. Now the Trent injury raises a few questions because now we've got Bradley probably starting the next 2. I wouldn't say Trent would be risked against Real Madrid. And I think Joe Gomez offers admirable cover on the right as well. So I was concerned before the season, but as the manager's proven this so far, he's made me kind of eat my words. So I'm content.
Yeah, it's maybe hard for you to think back to the summer as you dressed as a sexy Yeti next to me, Dan. But try your best to cast your mind back to pastel clothing and summer vibes. And how were you thinking about the defence, and how much has that changed?
I think largely okay with it, aside from maybe the aforementioned Konate injury concern. The left-footed centre-back thing never really made a ton of sense to me, just because if Van Dijk doesn't get injured, the person's never going to play. Maybe the player's like a left-back a little bit, but then you're just playing someone who isn't an actual left-back there. And what I've been really pleased about so far is that the full-backs are full-backs again. I think that in the latter half of the 2022-23 season, I say half, it was like the last 9 or 10 games, wasn't it, when Alexander-Arnold started doing the inverted thing. It gave Liverpool a way of doing something different that rejuvenated them. But then for a lot of last season, I think it contributed to them going behind first in so many games. And he was just for a really long time the best right back in the world, so just because I wanted him to do that again. And it's what they have been doing. They both stay wide. They both push up an awful lot. Liverpool end up in something that looks a bit like 2-3-5 again, fairly often. And that means that the players that are currently doing it are the ones who've previously done it really, really well. And it's not entirely the same by any means now. But it means that even though they're being coached by a new set of staff in a bit of a new way, it's actually kind of relearning maybe a little bit of what they were doing previously. And I think it makes sense to use people who've got experience of that anyway. We haven't seen a lot of Gomez and Kwanzaa so far, really, in terms of just pure minutes. But Kwanzaa had an excellent season last year, and I think is still a really, really good player, even though he's maybe had a couple of knocks of confidence so far. And for all the kind of periodic lambasting of him by some people, Gomez came into that Brighton game when Liverpool were dreadful and was terrific. The Liverpool squad is got loads of players in it for one, especially if you compare it to a team like Manchester City, and all of them are really good. Now, that doesn't mean that you never buy anyone again, by any means. But I don't think in the summer, and certainly not now, that you would look at it and think, oh, it's absolutely crying out for somebody in this position. Just because there's so many of them, and they've all demonstrated either very recently or in the not too distant past that they're really good.
Yeah, and I mean, that'll be this will hopefully be a common theme going through the show, Mo, is that a lot of players have reminded us that they're really good footballers, both in terms of the ones who've started a lot, but also the ones like Joe Gomez, who's maybe hasn't started as much as you like, but when he's come in, I was going to say hasn't let anyone down, but it was the opposite of that against Brighton. He was the best player in both boxes, which no one really sort of saw coming. But there are a lot of pluses from players who have either reminded everyone how good they are, and I'll talk specifically defensively here, although we will do it for other positions. But if from a defensive point of view, the likes of Virgil have just reminded us how good they are, and if you want to start, doing his obituary like your mic before the show, then like the mic, you'll end up looking silly. But also the ones who've sort of, come in, even the likes of Chimikas, who I think has performed to a high level this season, and a lot of people sort of would have moved on, but others as well. And I think Konate is form is a massive plus so far this season. And so for the ones who've played a lot and won a lot for Liverpool, I think they're showing it, and for others who maybe there would have been question marks are so far answering them too, and that's testament to them and the manager.
It is. I think the manager in particular deserves some credit here, because I think when we was thinking about maybe some of these players not being as good or maybe being on the way out last year, we were all kind of doing it within the prism of how Jurgen Klopp wanted them to play. And I think Arne Slot has made things a little bit easier, particularly for defenders, like Dan was saying. It's like he's not asking them to do too many more difficult things. There's a little bit more structure. They seem kind of more connected as a four, and they do tend to have a little bit more structure and security in front of them. So they're not being asked to do too much. But also, I think it depends upon how they feel, because the thing with Joe Gomez, I think there were some people who thought, well, maybe we can upgrade him, maybe we're not so sure how good he is anymore, he doesn't play centre-half for ages, etc., etc. But then there's the people who are like, well, he's too good to just sit there and be the fourth best defender. Surely at one point he's going to be like, I want to go away and play. So the players who are the reserves, if they're still happy to be reserves, then I think that makes the squad work so much better. But I mean, I also take Dan's point in terms of how many we've got in numbers in total. So as much as I feel like there will be a natural refreshing over some time in the next few years, I think it's more going to be the case of they can afford to sit and wait for the right player. So someone who can play left back but also play left-sided centre-back. If there's one of those that comes around with a decent fee range who looks like he can play the way we want to play, I can see us going for him. But there's not necessarily a rush like you would assume that there'd have been maybe previously.
Yeah, I think that's all fair, Ali, and I think, you know, like Dan said before, and like Mo's hinted at there, you know, you're always looking for improvements if you can, because, you know, there's people whose job it is solely recruitment sort of at the club, so they'll always be sort of working and looking. The manager has shown he's got extremely high standards, so we're always looking to be better. But I think, you know, from a defensive point of view, there is a lot there, and there is a lot of different blends of talents there, and there's different ages, and there's people who are at the very start of the career like Quansah who will, I'm sure, come again, and then there's people like Virgil who are going towards the end. But if anyone's listening from the contract team, there's plenty of life in the old dog, yeah. And so there's a really good combination of skills, and the manager's used different players at different times, but certainly a left back, he's sort of chopped and changed a little bit more, but also he's got that centre half partnership that he maybe wouldn't necessarily expect it, because he picked a different fella against Ipswich, but he has been the real rock that everything else has been formed on, and the stats show that.
Yeah, and I do wonder whether the conversation at the start of the season between Richard Hughes and Arne Slot was, let's actually assess the squad. Let's get to January and see how we look in this new system. Because I think actually Tsimikas has come in and played really well, because I think his role's been simplified a little bit. I don't think Tsimikas does particularly well when it's overcomplicated. He's been.
We tried to do that midfield big thing for him, didn't we? Like the reverse treads. Yeah. That was funny games.
But I think his role is simplified, and actually now Slot's looked at someone like Tsimikas and gone, "You're a really good system player." I don't think Kostas Tsimikas is the best left back in the world by any stretch, but I think in this system to come in for someone like Andy Robertson, I think he does really, really well. And I think the manager would have probably said to Richard Hughes, this is a transition season. I don't think we anticipated being where we are right now, but I think it was a conversation of, let's assess the squad properly before we start jumping into, let's buy a third left back. But if we didn't move Tsimikas on, we've got 3 left backs around the club. Now, most argument I completely agree with. I think a conversation around, could we then look at people that can do multiple different roles, like a Joe Gomez, so a left back who could play left-sided centre back? I think there'll be conversations about that, particularly in the summer. I think also with the centre back partnership as well, I think Slot, again, by sort of changing the workloads of Konate through, we're not inverting Trent as much anymore, so Konate's not actually putting in 95 minutes of just pure cardio anymore. I mean, some of the games we watched last season, the guy just did a bleep test for 95 minutes and just ran up and down to cover Trent, whereas now it's a case of Trent sits back a little bit. We saw it against Villa. They knock it past Trent. You think, Trent's been crap at defending again. And then Konate comes and goes, yeah, I'll have that. And I think that's a really, really interesting move from the manager. But I also think that has impacted his decision-making in terms of recruitment, because we don't need, as Dan and Mo have said, we do have a really deep squad, and I don't think we need to start upsetting the apple cart slightly by having 3 or 4 people in one position, and then you're looking at rotation for rotation's sake, and then we lose rhythm. The manager's massive on rhythm, and then if you're only playing 1 in every 3 games, then we start seeing performances change, then we start seeing results potentially change. So I think, I think we're where the manager thinks we should be, and as fans, I think we're ahead of where we thought we would be.
In terms of assessing the squad and assessing the defence in particular, but we'll do this sort of throughout. The injuries have been kind, if you want to use that. I mean, I guess there'll be people who work for Liverpool Football Club and would suggest that, you know, they do a lot of work to sort of prevent them, and the manager's been proactive, especially around the fullbacks, both in terms of Andy Robertson resting him a lot, Trent sort of taking him off and things like that. Trent eventually does get the injury, but he's the only one I can think of who's had an injury that's kept him out for longer than a game. It does help when that is the case in terms of when you're assessing the relative strength of a position, because, at the moment we're looking at it and thinking, well, there's two players for every position. There's players like Gomez who we like, who aren't even getting the minutes. But I guess what I'm saying is if you just had one more centre-half injury, then suddenly you're saying, well, Gomez is the replacement for centre-half, but he's also the replacement for right-back. And how do you do that? If you wanted to rotate it for a League Cup, for example.
Yeah, but you have to have a limit. They could have 11 defenders and 4 or 5 of them would be sat around never doing anything, bar in times of real crisis.
Yeah, not even making benches.
Exactly. You would be employing them for no real purpose for the majority of the time, which doesn't suit anyone. That will always be the case, that if your 2 left backs can just get knocks on international duty at the same time, and then you have to come up with a solution. It happens all the time, and some of it is fortune, some of it is sports science, and I have no knowledge of it, but it seems like they're really good at that in whatever way it is.
Well, it was talked about before they came.
Yeah. So if that has been helpful so far, then terrific. And I do think that as Ali said, that the way of playing probably makes a significant change as well, because it's not necessarily been the case in the last few, but earlier in the season, I think the Brentford game at home was the best example. Liverpool stopped playing for about 35 minutes. Yeah. Just knocked the ball about at centre half and in midfield, and no one was putting any load in their legs at all. And that can, as much as like managing muscle injuries better or whatever it is, that can make a huge difference to players who are going to play 3,000 odd minutes by the end of the season. If actually, a good few hundred of them who were basically stood there knocking it sideways, not doing an awful lot, then you kind of claw those back. So yeah, maybe they have been a little bit, or certainly more fortunate than Manchester City and Arsenal so far in regard to injuries, but there have been seasons in the past where that definitely wasn't the case. Yeah. And it isn't just luck, it is the way that you manage them as individuals and also the way that you play. So if you can do that and have a deep squad, which as we said they've definitely got, then that's about all you can do. You can't account for the fact that you've got 4 centre backs and 3 might get injured at once. It just happens, and then you have to try and deal with it as best as you can in a really difficult part. And the other teams that we're competing with are either doing that now or have been doing it already to varying degrees of success. I'm sure there will be a point where there's a position that you're looking at where someone is playing out of position for 3 weeks for Liverpool or something like that, because there's just the 2 that compete for that spot just aren't available. How the coach and staff adapt to that is a big part of their job. It's what they got paid to be doing, to be good at. So yeah, I don't think you can just say, oh, let's get 2 more centre backs because a couple of them get knocks from time to time. You just have to account for that and deal with it as you can.
Yeah, no, that's all fair. So last question, it'll be last question on all of them. It's for all. I'll just open up. Are we confident we have enough here for the season, or is anyone going to say to me, John, I feel like we need one more in January?
No, I think I'm all right. Obviously, for this season, I think we're all right. Yeah. There is the rather large variable that we haven't discussed yet around the current right back and his future plans.
Listen, in midweek, actually, we live relentlessly in the now.
Which obviously would make a massive difference in terms of if there is some indication between now and the end of January that Trent doesn't want to stay, and there is someone who is on their replacement list who's potentially available in January, then that obviously makes a difference. But other than that, no.
Okay. We'll move on to midfield. So let's do that summer picture again. It was probably the most contentious area in terms of discussion for Liverpool fans over the summer. There were no signings made in midfield at all. There was obviously the Zubimendi one, which fell through at the last minute. Thiago left, although he didn't feature at all, apart from about 9 minutes of the season before Bobby Clark was sold for a reasonable amount of money, and Stefan Bajcetic went on a free, and that got some chat too, and we'll maybe touch on that. But I'll start with you, Ali, this time. Did you think we were strong enough going into the season in midfield, and have you changed your mind?
I didn't think we were strong enough, if I'm brutally honest. I thought the Zubimendi deal would have been another piece to the puzzle that the manager evidently wanted and desired, because I don't think he originally saw Gravenberch being a long-term solution to that number 6 role. So I did think maybe that there would be more conversations had about the midfield. Now, obviously, my opinion has drastically changed after that, because Ryan Gravenberch seems to have come in and just set the world alight in that 6 role. And I think that's a conversation as well to include about the defence. I think the reason the defence has been so good is because the midfield have actually been so good as well. And I think they work in unison really, really well. But I think obviously we still have players coming back. So Curtis Jones didn't obviously start the season. He had a little knock, and then Harvey Elliott got injured with England. So my opinion has changed. I'm slightly aware that obviously with the amount of the volume of games we've got coming up, that this midfield rotation is going to be quite drastic over the next sort of 6 weeks. As I said earlier, we're playing a game pretty much every 4 days from Sunday now. So I'd like to see obviously Harvey Elliott get back into training and get some minutes. I don't think Alexis McAllister has had the best start to the season, but I think he's potentially been carrying a knock that has been sort of whispered around. So I'm more than happy with how the midfield's performed. I just I'm conscious about load and legs, and obviously with Ryan Gravenberch playing probably more minutes than he has done in the last 3 seasons, I think that's again another conversation. Do we look at putting McAllister back into the 6? Curtis Jones has obviously had a few games there under Jurgen and has dropped back as a 2 there. So I'm more than happy with how he performed. I think individual performances have been mightily impressive, but again, with the next sort of 6 weeks on the horizon, it's all to play for.
How about you, Dan? Same question. Plural.
I thought that the numbers were okay. Again, they've got a lot of centre mids.
Yeah.
But I did think they needed one to play the deepest, especially because everyone told me and everyone else that they were going to play 4-2-3-1 because he'd done that at Feyenoord. And I didn't watch pre-season, but apparently they did it quite a bit in pre-season. And then I rocked up at Portman Road and they were just playing 4-3-3. And I know that like out of possession, the like Jones or Szoboszlai recently have gone really high up and it's a bit like 4-2-4. But there's not 2 sitting central players. There's one, and Gravenberch does it on his own. If you were playing 2, then you would in theory need 4 that are able to do that. Towards the end of the previous season, Endo had done excellently for the majority of his time here, and unexpectedly so, I think, in the minds of most people. But towards the back end, when Liverpool admittedly were playing poorly as a collective, teams were giving him time on the ball. And so you do whatever you want with that, and he looked so limited, I think, in possession, trying to spray it long and stuff, and he's just not really up to that. So it seemed like they were trying to shift him, and I understood why. And I think if he had gone, they definitely would have needed someone else. And probably now of the view that they still need someone else that can play that's not Gravenberch. I know that Jones can do it, but he's doing so well further forward that I don't want him moved back. I would like him to keep competing with McAllister and Szoboszlai and Elliott when he's fit again for those 2 more advanced positions. Obviously Endo is still there, but he's not a long-term fit or the same tactically. He's really useful for coming on with 15 minutes left to go though, so that's absolutely fine. But that player might be Bajcetic. One of the reasons I probably did think that they needed one in the summer was that they were willing to let him go on loan, and I guess it makes sense after the injury and everything. I have no idea how he's getting on there. But when
okay, but he's playing, and that's the main thing.
But in 22-23, again, when Liverpool were really poor, he looked terrific. Great range of passing, can carry it. Read it really well, was playing in a team that was really poor at that time. So I think there's a ton of potential there. And is he still 19 or maybe just turned 20 or something like that? So they may believe like that's the player. We've got one that we have now settled on is absolutely fantastic, so he can be the main one. And therefore, what would you want secondary to that? Probably a younger player with loads of potential. Oh, we've got him already, is what they might think. And if that's what they believe, then I'm fine with that. Maybe they're looking at his performances there closely and thinking, well, if he's not setting the world alight in Austria, maybe it's not him, or maybe he's going to need a few years somewhere before it is him. So therefore, you do try and buy one. But I think they can relax a lot more about it now, and the idea of it being someone that they might have spent was 60 or 70 million quid on in Zubimendi, maybe a little bit less. So but big money for like a proven international player at a really high level who's in his mid-20s can maybe now be someone for quite a bit less money who's maybe less proven, but the data shows is terrific and has a ton of potential. And if you can just guide him by being that second option for a few years, can become amazing. I don't think it needs to be someone that is an absolute dead set starter, because then what are you doing with Gravenberch, who's been terrific?
What about you, Mo? Before we sort of get into a few more specifics, did you think we were strong enough going into the season? Have you changed your mind?
I kind of align with these two in as much as I felt like there was a reason why Slot wanted Zubimendi in the first place. There was something that he saw within those that he thought it could be added to it. But I'm still kind of on the fence, really, in terms of where we are now, because it depends. Do you think that we've got 7 central midfielders, or do you think we've got 5? Because I'm not sure what Slot thinks. Because, as Dan said, Endo's only been doing the 15-minute slots here and there. Tyler Morton hasn't had any minutes outside the League Cup. So, really, we've got 5. And
5 if he's willing to start.
Yeah, 5 if he's
and I
willing
think that's important, isn't it, Mo? Because if we've got a tough run of games coming up, and, you know, aside from the League Cup game where you expected sorts of changes, if he's not willing to start Endo and Morton in any of those, then you haven't got them as starting options.
Exactly. And I mean, I wrote a piece this week talking about Ryan Gravenberch.
Where can you find that, Mo?
It's out there on Substack. You look at mostewart.substack.com. Talking about exactly this and Ryan Gravenberch, and saying that, well, if you're not going to rotate Ryan Gravenberch against the team currently bottom of the league, then when are you going to rotate him? He's played every Premier League minute so far this season, and as Andy alluded to, the last 2 seasons he hasn't really played a lot at all. So you're kind of going from hardly anything to everything. And he's still a young player, but you do fear about that kind of load, particularly when we're talking about sports science, particularly when we're in a situation where if he does go down injured, then we are scrubbing around to say, well, who is going to be the other guy? Because in theory, McAllister can do it, but I just think that there's physical limitations to his ability to play particularly if he's going to be the sole defensive midfielder. I think there's physical limitations to his play in terms of getting around the pitch. I think he can be got at, particularly if you see some of the yellow cards he's taken. He's got more yellow cards this season than anyone else, and the majority of them are when someone's beaten him and he's just pulled them down.
Yeah.
So you really can't afford to have that be your guy for maybe 3-4 weeks at a time. And we've got a massive December, 9 games in 29 days. That's a lot. So I still think that ideally I'd like another one. But by saying all of that, I'm still of the opinion that we need to see more of Tyler Morton, because what Dan was saying just now about in terms of a young player who come through, who's not necessarily going to ask to be starting minutes all the time, but give something different. The thing that you get from Tyler, which you don't even get from Ryan Gravenberch, to be honest, he's a tempo passer. He's someone who has a high volume of passing. He can pass long, he can pass short, he can dictate the way the play goes from that deeper position. And that's really what Martin Zubimendi's main qualities were in terms of what he has that no one else in our squad has. So if you want to see if this guy can do it, let's see if he can do it. And then if he can't do it, that's when you go into the market.
It's interesting, the Stefan Bajcetic's decision in relation to this, Ali, because, you know, one way of looking at it might be, well, if Tyler Morton's not getting any minutes, do you know what I mean? Stefan Bajcetic should be just sat alongside him and training, having a moan. So it'd be someone for Tyler Morton moaning to moan too. It's like the manager off. My graphic's not even any good. But aside from that, you're thinking, well, he was probably better off going out on loan, because, like I said, he's played a lot. I think he's played 13 games. I don't think he's pulling up any trees, but I think that's maybe even more justification to send him out on loan, because if he is rusty and he is needed to get back onto speed, then have that on Salzburg's time rather than ours. So I think on the face of it, it looks the right decision. But maybe if he was here, the manager, because of how he plays, because, you know, he's got a little bit more Liverpool experience than sort of Tyler Morton, and because of, you know, his qualities, do you think maybe the manager would have found a way to use him a little bit more, than he would have been another starting option?
I think personally the reason why Morton stayed and Bajcetic went is obviously Morton last season was on loan at Blackburn and played, by all accounts, the majority of fixtures.
Yeah.
And he's had a lot of rhythm and he's had a lot of minutes and he's played in a tough league. And Bajcetic had, we were told, growing issues, sort of growth problems and things like that, which prolonged his return to fitness. So I think the manager probably weighed up the fact that Morton could come in and provide something with rhythm and minutes within his legs. Now, I think if you're Tyler Morton, you're going to sit there and go, I probably deserve a few more minutes after last season. But if you're Stefan Bajcetic, I don't think it would be fair on Bajcetic coming back into this team this season and playing sort of 1 game and then 3 out with, I mean, effectively last season we saw him a handful of times. And I think the manager I think he realised that, and especially with Pep Lijnders going over to Salzburg, I think it was an opportunity to go and play without any stress, with freedom, gain confidence, gain the rhythm, where you're in a league where the spotlight's not on you as much. I know they're a Champions League outfit, but the games aren't televised over here week in, week out. But again, I think if you're Tyler Morton and you've had that conversation with the manager saying, I want you to stick around this season, you would be sort of hoping to garner a few more minutes than you currently are doing. And as Mo says, if you're not going to be able to obtain some minutes against the bottom of the league at the weekend, and by no sort of slagging off for Southampton, they're a good outfit, they're a Premier League team. If you're Tyler Morton, you are sitting there thinking, I think I deserve it.
Endo as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as Dan said though, he's been great last season and he's done an admirable job, but he's quite limited. And with the way we're looking to play at the minute, I think if you're Tyler Morton on Sunday, you'll be asking at least for time off the bench. So it's one of those. I think Bajcetic, as Dan said, I think he's a long-term plan, and this is a really good test for him to see if he could become a Liverpool player for the long term here. Because if he's not really doing it in Austria, again, no disrespect to the Austrian league, but if he's not doing it there, he's probably going to struggle to come in and be a good enough replacement for Ryan Gravenberch when he's rested.
I think we're fine to disrespect the Austrian league. They're not here. What are we going to do? Invite us over to the Arnold Schwarzenegger Stadium for a fight. They can go fuck themselves. Injuries, again, has it been sort of too bad? Does the Harvey Elliott one? Ironically, the Yacht on England duty, I think it is. And he's sort of been out, hopefully back soon. Curtis Jones had a little bit of time out, which was frustrating for him, but obviously he's come back and showing no signs of that now. It's been okay. I guess the worry becomes that, what we've all talked about is that are we asking, a lot of certain players. I agree with Ali that McAllister probably has been playing with something for a little bit, although maybe a lot of players do. I don't know, but I think, it isn't an area in the pitch that you that we want to be unkind for injuries, and so I think, although it's a shame about Elliott, I think we sort of have to take what we've been given as not too bad. But did you agree?
Yeah, I think. Aside from in goal, but that has been dealt with really well.
Yeah.
You deal on every area of the pitch and who's been absent and for how long so far. It's a real shame about Elliott. I think there was a point where it felt like he could have got a bit of a run. Maybe between the September and October breaks when Szoboszlai was maybe having a little bit more of a harder time, but I don't think was as bad as maybe was being made out by some people. But it just means that he's lost this kind of initial momentum with the coaching. So whereas everyone else has been getting used to the new way of doing things, and when he does play, he's going to have to do the thing where he goes and stands next to Nunes or Jota as this kind of second striker in the press when they're out of possession. Like, he's going to have to learn that still, because he won't have done an awful lot of it so far. So that must be quite frustrating from a technical point of view more than a fitness one. It's just that you're behind everyone in terms of knowledge. Basically, I'm sure they show him things and include him in meetings and stuff like that, but it's one thing being taught and one practicing. So I'm interested to see how he gets on with it when he comes back, because in that position, obviously Szoboszlai and Jones have done it to maybe in the past 6 weeks or whatever to varying degrees, or at least in different ways. Szoboszlai off the ball, I think, really good on it, maybe making some poor decisions. Jones more effective probably when he's in possession. But Elliott will offer something quite different, almost just by virtue of being left-footed as well. Never mind all the rest of the differences between him and the other two. I think that's really good options to have that play there. And I guess that's a contrast between, if you're looking at the three most advanced ones, and you'd say Szoboszlai, Jones and Elliott, compared to the three deepest ones, i.e. Gravenberch, Endo, Morton. It feels like there's maybe more fitness issues likely with the ones further up, but you're more sure about them probably tactically and technically in terms of the way that we want to play now, compared to maybe the two in behind Gravenberch deeper. So you've got kind of two bits of not absolute certainty in either regard, but for different reasons. That makes sense. One's more physical durability, one's more, are you still going to be here in a year? Is this system really for you? And despite the fact that they've played really well so far, you don't know those things, because the deeper ones haven't played very much. And Elliott hasn't played very much, but for a very different reason. So once he's back and part of a squad that is playing every 3 days or whatever, I'm really interested to see how he uses him. I wonder whether as well he'll do a bit of playing off the right just to give Salah a rest from time to time or whatever. But when it might suddenly feel, if the other two stay fit, like he's got loads of options basically for that advanced one. And I wonder if it'll be a bit horses for courses. You know, we're playing such and such, it really suited if we had an extra left footer, or actually we're playing against really high level opponent that's going to have a lot of the ball as well as we are, so we get to go to Szoboszlai because he's the best one off the ball maybe. I think you might see a lot of changing between the three of them, if and when they're all available.
Yeah, no, it's going to be an interesting period of the season in many ways, but certainly how the manager, manages individuals and the collective workload is going to be fascinating indeed. Okay, we'll finish with the question that we did last time. Are we confident we have enough here for the season, or do we think we need one more?
I mean, I feel like we're going to be linked with one more, whether we want to or not. And it just depends upon whether those links are based on what we didn't do in the summer or what we've now since seen over the course of 6 months. Again, I think the questions that we've all kind of posed over the course of the last 20 minutes need answering, i.e. how does he really feel about Morton, about Endo? What does he believe he can do with Elliott? I think going on Elliott, he was really unlucky sort of the timing of his injury, because he was probably the star of pre-season.
Yeah.
Like, I remember going back to the Arsenal game in Philadelphia, he was the one who everyone was talking about after that game.
I was really surprised not to see him start against Ipswich. In fact, I don't even think he comes on.
No.
Yeah.
So, he, and like Dan said, that period of time in September, October where Szoboszlai was not necessarily... Well, he felt like he was a bit in his own head, if not necessarily playing badly. Him coming in there, we've seen players come in and kind of earn the shirt and then keep it, like Curtis Jones has. He would have been feeling that would have been perfect for him as well. So what we do with him between now and the end of January is going to be a massive decider in all of this, I think, as well.
Do you think, I mean, I was talking about one more. Do you think it's probably a case of... And I guess this is anywhere, but probably more so for midfield, Ali, is that, I'm saying, do we think we need more? Is there one more? It almost does depend on who is available and who isn't, and they'll be looking at it and think, like Dan said before, numbers-wise, they're fine, but somebody who can do this very specific role that the manager wants, they would like one more, but there's only so many of them, and... So it's more of a case of, well, can they get the right player rather than, necessarily needing one more fielder because they are there, and he might have big Christmas plans for Endo.
Yeah, do you know what? There is one thing you can guarantee with the club, especially with how they run, is they will only move if it is the right player. We won't just sign a player for signing its sake, and we are very stubborn, and it's quite matter of fact with that. I mean, the links this week with Carlos Baliba from Brighton have sort of reared their head a little bit, but again, someone has to come in and be able to slot in immediately and be able to play in our system. And I think, like you said, I think the next couple of weeks up until January are going to be vital for the manager to assess, one, fitness, and two, rhythm. Because if he feels as though we just don't need one right now, I guarantee the club will align with him and say, okay, fine, and we'll wait until the summer. But like you said, we've got it's the intensity of the next sort of 6 weeks, especially, is massive. So it may come to a point where our hands forced, and especially if McAllister, if this knock, if he can shake it off, but if he picks up anything like that, or if Gravenberch starts to tire and he starts to fatigue, and the sports science just can't manage him through games, I think we will have our hand forced. But I don't think the club aren't. They don't react without clear planning and clear process, and I would say we wouldn't sign anyone, and we wouldn't sort of upset the apple cart until the end of the season, personally.
I think maybe one more, but only if somebody left. I think the raw numbers are fine. But it might suit everybody. I think if Tyler Morton went and played for either Southampton or Ipswich for 5 months from January, I think he'd really help them, for one.
Yeah, I was going to say, it really suits Southampton.
But they both want the ball as well. It's not like you'd just be chasing shadows going and playing for either of those teams. And I think they've got a bit of weakness at centre mid, and it'd be a good test of him in the Premier League. I don't see the point of him doing a Championship alone again, because he's done two. He can do that really well. So maybe if he went, and then maybe if there was an offer for Endo that they thought, that might be worth taking, then maybe you would say, all right, you're going to go away for 6 months, you're going to leave, therefore there's a clear gap there. We can maybe spend 20-30 million quid on someone that we think can be a bit of a young understudy to Gravenberch, but that is already, playing a higher level than maybe what Morton has been. But I think if they're going to keep both of those till the end of the season, then I probably doubt that they would buy someone.
Okay, the forwards, the lads who scored the goals. We will do the summer picture again. Chiesa was an addition. We did buy someone. Hallelujah. We bought Chiesa. Doak and Gordon went out on loan. And so I'll start with you this time, Dan, as I've moved around. Did you think we were strong enough going into the season? Have you changed your mind?
I'd always have one more forward. Even in the summer, I wanted one more forward more than anywhere else. As much as I was saying earlier, I'd have had a holding midfielder. I just always think you need someone else that scores. It turns out he's not available to score, and God knows when he will be again. But I felt that they'd done well to get a sixth that, even when fit, is clearly a very good player. And in the couple of games that he did play, I thought he looked really good. It didn't look like he was a new player, which I think is really complimentary. He looked intelligent. The stuff that you saw of him, at training when they put the videos out and stuff, he seemed to get on really well with them. I didn't realise that his English was as impressive as it is, which for Italian players coming to the Premier League isn't very common. And the rest of them have been largely terrific, I think. Salah, for criticism of him again last season, despite how well I thought he'd done for the vast majority of it, was maybe uncertain in some people's minds going into it, and I think has just been amazing. Himself in terms of the output and stuff like that, but also in games where you might think he wasn't fully at it. You come away and he scored once and set one up. He's still absolutely one of the best in the world in his position, and more than the possibility of them buying anyone else or anything like that, I just really hope that they arrange something with him, which means we get to watch him play football for a couple of years more, because he shows no sign of being less effective or influential or dropping in terms of on-field leadership and tone setting. He turned up for that first game at Portman Road looking probably fitter than he's ever looked, and I thought really making clear to everyone else, we start fast here from the very start. We don't take any of this lightly. We're really serious about everything that we're doing. And he didn't have a brilliant game that day either. I thought he struggled a little bit first half against Davis, who's a decent left-back for Ipswich. But he still scored and set one up, and was the most important player on the pitch. And as much as there are players further back who you would maybe give higher marks to in individual matches so far this season, he has still been Liverpool's most important player, because he puts the ball in the net all the time, or he puts it on a play for someone else to put in the net all the time. And that's invaluable. And I really, really hope that the logic maybe of his age and numbers of what normally happens to players and stuff like that doesn't outweigh his sheer brilliance, and that they sort it all out. Obviously they're all important, but I would rather watch him play for a couple of years more than the other two. I think he's my absolute priority that they need to get sorted out.
In terms of the wider forwards, Mo, then ask you the same. Do you think we're strong enough going into the season? Have you changed your mind? That's with the addition of Chiesa, we'll say.
Okay, so I don't know how good everyone's memories are, but I was possibly one of the only people who flagged up the potential for what we have been seeing with Chiesa.
I remember, to be fair.
And got shouted down quite a lot.
Oh, it's because we want the shiny new thing. No one's to hear your new toys crap. Do you know what I mean? Shut up now. It's exciting.
But I was, when added to the way that Diaz, Nunes, and to be fair to him, Salah had finished the season for different reasons. I think the whole Salah argument with Klopp was probably blown out of proportion, but it did add to the feeling that all wasn't well, and maybe he started to look beyond Liverpool as his destination. And then with with Nunes and with Diaz, the way that they finished the season, there was lots of talk of, well, are they ever going to be at the level required, etc., etc. Well, I think Luis Diaz has handsomely answered that question. Obviously, Salah, he's one of those guys who, when he's got something to prove, when he's got people to kind of prove wrong, then he's at his best. And I think it's important to remember that while most other players were off doing international tournaments in the summer, he was in the lab working hard, chiseling those damn abs. And it's kind of important to think that both him and Erling Haaland are the two best players at the start of the season, and both of them were just kicking their heels over the summer.
As was Chris Wood.
As was Chris Wood, indeed. Okay, so three best players. So I'm not surprised to see the way he started the season. I think I'm pleased and pleasantly surprised by how all of them have done. But the ringer and the kind of underrated one for me is Cody Gakpo. Because again, I think if you'd have looked towards the middle to end of last season, most people would have thought, well, again, has he really delivered on what we were hoping he would? And again, he's been fantastic to start this season. He's given the manager real options. And then obviously there are still question marks for a lot of people around Darwin Nunes, but now we've got the ability to play Diaz through the centre because of how well Gakpo and him have been playing. It kind of mitigates that to a certain extent. I see the arguments around the fact that, like, obviously Jota's got injured again, and it's kind of another one of those things where it's like, oh, can we? Is that going to be something who we're going to end up regretting? But in terms of production that we're getting out of the forward line at the moment, it's hard to look better.
Yeah, what do you think? It did look on paper that are probably our strongest position once they'd added Chiesa sort of going into the season, but like Dan says, that there's part of it sort of always wanting more. The two lads go on loan, sort of like I mentioned. It's a shame we've not seen Jayden Downs at all so far this season, although I think they pretty much knew that. I think they were generally sort of underplaying that deliberately. I think by the time the transfer window closed, they pretty much knew that he wasn't going to be available for the rest of the calendar year. But as a six, did you feel like it was strong enough going into the season, and have you changed your mind?
I thought we were strong enough. I think my thing for this season was about your Cody Gakpo's, your Luis Diaz's just stepping up. I didn't actually think we needed... We'd all like another one, but I didn't think we needed another one with 6 attackers. I think this season, Cody Gakpo, and I mentioned it on another pod, I just think he looks so comfortable. And again, I don't know whether this is a simplifying of his role to go, right, you're now just left wing. You're not going to play as a 9. You're not going to drop deep. You're not going to get dropped into midfield. You're going to do what you did for PSV, and you're going to do what you do for Holland. And you're going to play off the left, and you're going to cut in and kick the ball really, really hard.
Does kick it hard, does it?
Does kick it so hard. And I love that because he just looks so much more comfortable, and he started using things like, he's just started using his frame a bit more. He's a big guy, he's 6'4", and he's just started bullying people, and he's got the confidence to do it and beat his man. The same with Luis Diaz. It was a season where I just thought, we need you to kick on now, because Mo's been carrying the burden for so many years. And actually, I think this invariably has helped Mo Salah, because the pressure of him thinking, I've got to score 2 goals every single game, or I've got to have an impact on the game, he doesn't have that burden anymore. Obviously, as Mo Salah, he's still going to want to do all of those things, but he's not relied upon solely, which I think's enabled him to relax a touch more, which is why we've seen his output maybe increase, because the pressure's not... It's Mo Salah's attacking line with some help. It's now Gakpo, Diaz, Nunes. It's now Salah can play off the right. I don't think Slot's ever going to drop Salah, but if we wanted to rest Salah like we did against Brighton, again, I think we have an admirable forward line that we wouldn't ever be concerned about that. Now, obviously, you have your Jota conundrum every season, but I think... I'd say that a lot of the fan base are probably content that you're only going to see Jota for about 25 games a season now. He's never going to pump up the numbers to do 50 games a season. But when he does play, he's such a maverick, and he does so much work off the ball for us that I think you're okay with Diogo Jota being a little bit on the periphery of the attacking line. The concern I have with Chiesa is he's a similar type of that, where I think Chiesa's really exciting, but again, he's a little bit on the periphery because he just picks up these little knocks, and we saw he had the big injury in Italy, but he just picked up a hamstring injury there or a calf there, and it just started to derail the progress. So I think the forward line looks frightening, if I'm honest, and I think the next sort of 6 weeks, I think they're all dead excited to just get out there.
It's funny, Dan, because in the summer a lot was made of the manager getting more out of Darwin Nunes, and that was like something that he was asked about in press conferences, and there's something to talk about. Is he going to be the man who unlocks, the great potential or mystery of Darwin? Of the 5 who were already there, he's arguably sort of had the quietest time, Darwin. I think he's been fine last few weeks. I think he's been a good option, and I think we've almost sort of stopped talking about him in terms of in the way that we used to, the price tag and sort of everything around it. He's sort of just another forward option now, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure he would sort of like more, but for where he is now, I don't think that's necessarily too bad a thing. Where the people who he's got more out of a Cody Gakpo, who we maybe thought might happen, but that was sort of a bit of he's Dutch, they'll sort it out, sort of type thing. But they have, albeit with a little bit of a slow start. He doesn't come straight in. I think Diaz has been the real revelation, certainly sort of how he started. And what I also think is, I feel like more so than last year, whichever three he puts on, they look like a good three and a good partnership and working well together. Whereas I didn't think that was always the case last season. I thought last season I was so excited about the forward options, and then it felt like some weeks the combinations did work, and certain players would play well with each other, but not necessarily with the others. Where I feel like this season so far, whoever we put on, listen, forwards have had poor individual games, and against Forest it was all of them. But I feel like there's been good individuals who've kicked on, but also I think as a collective, I think they've 9 times out of 10 they've looked smart in terms of what they've done.
It's the shape, I think. The wide forwards are much closer to the goal, and that makes a big difference. Last couple of years, sort of post Firmino being the guaranteed starter, it was more traditional striker, and the wide players are wide and are the creative force, and Alexander-Arnold is more central, and that all changed. And I mean, it was really effective last season. They genuinely challenged for the title until it went wrong in the last few weeks. But it means that the threatening players are closer to the thing that they're trying to do, but also closer to each other. And I think that just lends itself to collaborating more often, because you're going to be doing it less with a fullback or a centre mid. You're going to link up with the striker more often, or wide forward on the other side. But also you get more chances to do it, which I think has helped them all, to be honest. And I think in particular it has helped Nunes. I think in the past few weeks he's done well in quite a bizarre way that I never expected, because I don't think he's been anywhere near as threatening. He takes way less shots than what he was doing in the past couple of years, for example. He's like in a dangerous position in the box less often, and that sounds like a criticism, but I really don't mean it as one. It's because he's doing a lot of the other things that he was doing poorly the majority of the time much better now, i.e. being part of like the defensive press out of possession, linking up with people in midfield or either side of him, working really hard for the team and helping create chances for other people. Creating chances doesn't necessarily mean playing a through ball and someone's in one-on-one, but occupying a bit of space deep that means wide left when you're away in Europe and Cody Gakpo's playing there. There's space for him because you've come deep and brought the defender with you, and then the ball over the top goes, and so on and so forth. So I think he's been doing well. It's whether he can combine, I think, the really impressive system and tactical stuff with still being is very like impactful in the penalty area self that he was able to do in the past. That's hard to do, to stitch both of those two things together, especially when a lot of the chances that are being created are for the wide forwards. You are not necessarily the man that we're trying to get the ball to score the goals. But it means that in a way the pressure is off him a little bit, the fact that other people are scoring, and it feels like there's a little bit less goal scoring responsibility on his shoulders. I think that means that he can worry less, or if he is a sort of, kind of self-critical, anxious sort of player. I've got no idea if he is, but if he is, then you can maybe just kind of park that a little bit and just, if you're just doing this job, that's fine. Other people can help take care of the goals. So I think that's about realistically as much as you could ask for now. And to have kind of stepped up after not playing very much at all in the first few weeks of the season. He wasn't even getting off the bench that often, or for more than say 10 or 15 minutes. To have replaced Jota as effectively as I think he has is really quite good. Yeah. Whether for very different reasons, either of them is the forward that will start for Liverpool in 18 months down the middle, I'm not sure still. Because of Jota's durability, and whether Nunes can combine this tactical stuff with being a proper potent goal scorer, I don't know yet. But for now, I think both of them have done as well as you can realistically ask of them, and that's absolutely fine. And then the two on the left, have been terrific. Diaz just looks like he's willing to take people on again, which for whatever reason, whether it was an instruction, whether it was his own reticence, I don't know, but he kind of stopped doing for a good 18 months or so. Before that, obviously had the injuries and the personal stuff, so maybe just being able to park that feels like a rejuvenation for him. And I do think that the physical thing with Gakpo is what has made a difference. If you think of like his movement early days, and even when he was playing down the middle in that like United 7-0, for example, it's all there. Finishing, brilliant. Being able to like roll his man, great. Knowing where to snap, great. And then he just kind of stopped offering a lot of things, no runs, very little link-up play, and looked really meek despite being massive. And I think all of the games when he plays well, I don't think he really did this against Chelsea when he had, not a bad game, but a quiet one. But all of the games when he plays well, you're really aware of how big and wide he is, if that makes sense, because he's willing to pick the ball up and just run at someone, and then they're really scared of him. Brighton in the League Cup was probably the best example of that, because of the difference in size between him and Tarek Lamptey. But it was like he just looked at him and kick off and went, "You've got no chance. I'm enormous compared to you, and I'm going to take advantage of that." And the games in Milan and Leipzig away as well, when you would maybe think it's easier to shrink a little bit when you're a European away game, he didn't. So if he can kind of maintain that belief in his physical ability as well as his technical ability, which has always like clearly been there, then I think that makes him 10 times the player. And it definitely is helping him that he's not being asked to play down the middle ever, basically. Because for whatever reason, even though it looked promising at different points in the past, it just didn't work out. And now he has that ability to knock the ball a yard in front of himself, stand up, sort of look at the fullback and go, right, here we go then. And no one wants to deal with that.
No. One player I forgot to mention was Carvalho. I think I left him out of midfielders to put him in forwards and then didn't. So let's talk a little bit about him, because maybe I forgot him because he wasn't at Liverpool last season, and so he doesn't feel like a loss from that point of view. You're not replacing sort of any minutes. He was out on loan last year, but similar to Elliott, who you mentioned before, Mo, he had a really sort of bright summer, and then the offer comes and he goes, and I was maybe a little bit surprised just because I thought he was looking good, and I thought, maybe there'd be an option for him. But I guess the way we have set up and what he's done with the wide forwards, you just kind of see he is a different type of player, and he's probably better off where he is now.
I agree. I think that it was easier to make the case for him to get minutes in pre-season because, frankly, the whole squad weren't there. So it was easier for him to say, well, you can do bits here, you can do bits there, and it was still working out exactly who was best suited to what position, who can I rely on to do this and that and the other. But ultimately, when you look at his main place in the season, as we set it up, would have been as the most advanced forward. And if you think about Elliott and Szoboszlai, I think he's behind both of those in terms of what he can offer to the team. So he was always going to be, he was going to be another one sitting next to Tyler Morton, slagging off the manager, basically.
In that gang.
Yeah. And I think it's also been instructive that he hasn't been starting a whole hope of going to Brentford either. I think he's still kind of...
I think it's mad that he went there. There's no position for him in that shape, I don't think.
He's still coming off the bench for them, so...
Because he's not a striker, he's not a centre mid, and they play with wing-backs. So where are you going to pay? I think it might have just been one of them where it was, he's got loads of potential and we've got some money. And let's just do it, because we won't lose his value.
We can flip him if it doesn't work, yeah. I mean, to be fair, you'd probably look better off going back to his old team in West London, but then they just bought Emil Smith-Rowe, so again, it's like, well... Yeah, it's a strange one, but I think that he is an example of what Liverpool needed to kind of get back to doing, which is selling well, which I think is a really important part of the whole recruitment kind of element. So between him, we did very well from Brentford. Like, I loved them before this, but this summer they've really kind of got up in my estimation, even though they didn't sell us Brian Mbeumo, which I would have quite liked at the summer as well.
Watch this space. You never know.
But I think in the case of him, it was very much a case of like, it's hard to see an eventuality whereby he'd have been still Liverpool and we'd have all been like, oh, thank God we still got him here.
Mo Salah still your favourite one, Ali?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I go to your house, he's the one you got on the walls.
Yeah,
shirt off.
Yeah, he just never seems to. He never wavers away. Like he never turns down responsibility, which I love. And he is always the first person to put his hands up after a game and go, "That was right, that was wrong," and I love that. And he's boss at footy. So, do you know what I mean? As a package deal, it's brilliant.
Yeah, crap people taking responsibility is the last thing you want. Me going on pitch, I've got this, boys.
But I just think now that we've alluded to the contract situation, and Dan said, obviously, I think I can't pick between them. I struggle to pick between them, but I think this season's proved that there's no dip in value or form, and I don't mean monetary value, but his value to us. And I don't see us being able to replace it for a suitable fee for another player in terms of his output, in terms of his responsibility, in terms of his link-up play. I don't see that person on the market. If I'm honest, now Mo mentioned about Brian and Mbeumo, and there's a few other names sort of.
Who's your man at Leon who doesn't score any goals?
Cherokee?
Yeah. I'm looking at you too.
Yeah. Ryan Cherokee, yeah.
Yeah. And again, do you know what? He may be a brilliant player. I've seen a bit
score
of him.
Any goals, Ali?
His output, he's got no output. And you just think, if we're haggling around, if it's purely a monetary issue, I just think it's silly, because what you would then have to go out and spend to replace that, maybe on 2 players, and then those players often we like to buy under the age of 25. We have a profile, over 100 games, etc., etc. They might not hit the ground running. So then you've got 18 months of bedding in 2 new players to replace a bloke that I would say is still the best right winger in the world right now, and still doesn't seem to have any drop-off in form. He has drop-off moments in games, but every player has that. I can't expect Mo Salah to be incredible for 95 minutes, but you know he's going to be in every single game he plays in. And I think we have to address the issue, preferably pre-Christmas, but I think something's got to happen and a decision has to be made, because if we're gonna part ways, I feel as though, again, the conversation needs to be had, because otherwise planning's got to start occurring.
I think it's easy to look at it and just say, well, obviously he's still great, we need to give him what he wants. The problem is that if it was only him, then that would have been done already. But it's not just him, it's him and it's Virgil and it's Trent. And they're all waiting to see how much money he gets to then go in there and say, well, if he's got that, I want this. And that's why we're in this kind of impasse where no one's really kind of putting their foot down and saying, this is what I want. In terms of, do we think that Liverpool will regret giving him more money in 2 years' time? I find it hard to believe, personally. I think Mo Salah's the kind of guy who, even if you're not picking him every week, if you've got him on the bench and he can still come on and give you 25 minutes, he will cause absolute merry hell in those 25 minutes, and he will possibly still win you the game. I'm finding it hard to believe there's a scenario where he's no good. He's useless. And I mean, you can say, well, we shouldn't be giving a guy who's sitting on the bench X, Y, Z amount of money. I think there are times when you're building a squad where you have to say, okay, there are exceptions. We have this rule, we have this framework, but within that framework, we need to be able to build exceptions. Because frankly, if you asked everyone else in that Liverpool squad, would you care about Mo Salah earning more money than you sitting on the bench, or would you rather Mo Salah wasn't there at all? I think most of them would rather have Mo Salah in the squad. Anyone
who thinks that they should get paid as much as them as well should just be told, well, fucking score 30 for 7 years. And if you don't, we'll take it all off you. Should we shake on that?
Leon got 1 league goal last year. 4-1.
But also, if you are going to replace him, I think you can't replace him with one player. I think that's the most important thing. So it's going to take time to replace him. And frankly, the first guy who we've brought in to kind of not even replace him but rotate with him, we've hardly seen him. So it's not really the greatest start in terms of the post-Mo Salah era. So I think we're going to need more time to get in as many different players within the squads who can kind of do bits. So overall, when you're looking at totals for the team, there's not a massive drop-off. But yeah, sign the thing, man.
But I think I also think the club they've got to take a massive amount of responsibility here, because obviously
I can't believe it. You've maybe going to contract chat, lads. We got so far.
But I just think the club now, we've got to a point where there's 3 world-class players that are waiting on a contract here, and now we're kind of in this Mexican standoff where they're not agreeing a new deal till they find out what Mo Salah's on. Mo Salah's not agreeing a new deal until he finds out if Trent Alexander's going to Real Madrid or not, and we're in this vicious cycle of someone's got to make a decision here and really stand up and either take responsibility for it, because a club as well run as us, and we are complimented by a number of other fans and clubs by how well run we are. To get in this situation is, I just think it cannot happen, and it shouldn't happen to a club like us. I think it's unacceptable. And now we're sat here going, well, we might have to replace him with 2 players next year. No, fuck that. Just pay the bloke. Just pay the bloke what he wants, and then we don't have to worry about signing a bloke that scores 1 league goal in France.
just get them all in the same room, get them to write down a number on a bit of paper, and then just give them the bit of paper. And
write down a total number, like £1 million, and then you 3 sort it. And we're going to pay you, the 3 of you, £1 million a week. Yeah, there'll be bonuses, we'll work that out. Just sort it out amongst yourselves. Put a spread on. Because it might take a while. And just see what they come out with. I'd like that as an experiment.
Should do it like Deal or No Deal. Where you've got a box and it's got a salary in it, but we'll play the game and we'll continually, every so often, John Henry will ring you and say, well, you've got rid of the low one, so I'll go up a little bit. And then you've got to get to the end and see who's got what. And maybe someone gets paid a penny, and then it says, "Well, I'm going to get off."
It feels like
if you did it as a live stream, so you can all split the revenue as well.
Yeah,
because they make millions off that. That can be your signing on fee.
Yeah,
and we're not going to do Stephen Mulhern. We're going to get you Noel Edmonds, and I think they'd all say, "Spot on." Name the time and place.
Sorted it. Up to that. That's been the Midweek Extra. Shout out again to Green King Sports. Do download the app. Make sure you're following them on Instagram as well. Really good football accounts. I'll be doing a Real Madrid preview next week for Green King Sports on their app. That'll be fun. I'm going to say we're going to batter them, I'll be honest with you, because that's the kind of guy I am. Up to Reds. Thanks a lot to Dan, to Ali, to Mo, to Andy for producing, for Ash for doing all the filming. Whatever you've been watching or listening, hope you've enjoyed it. Up to Reds.